writer.
There you go.
So sorry.
Those are the words we wanted to hear. So I decided, I got into the journalism business back in 1983 because I liked telling stories. I liked to write in school, and that led me to a career in journalism. I moved up the food chain and took on administrative responsibilities, but that was never my intent. I always wanted to just be a writer. And so I thought, yeah, I could kind of go back to my roots and do some writing. So this book, Back Home, Country Tales Through the Seasons, is really a compilation of many of the columns that I've written over the years. It is divided into 4 seasons, and I have about 20 chapters for each season. And so basically it tells you about kind of a year on the life of the farm, told over many different years. Some of the stories are 30 years old, some of them are new, but they're very timeless stories that kind of talking about living and growing up on a farm. I grew up on the same farm where I now live. We moved there, my family moved there when I was 5 years old. It was a dairy farm. So that was it was always a part of me. I couldn't wait to get off the farm because I hated doing the work. And then after getting into the real world for a while, I realized that all of the important things that I learned on a farm helped make me a successful person, because you learn the value of hard work, and you learn how to do chores, and you learn how to problem solve. And some of those things I write about in the book. So I had always had the intentions of putting together a book. So about 3 years ago, I had most of my compilation done, and I sent it to the State Historical Society Press and submitted it to say, are you guys interested in publishing this book? And I got they said, send us some more material. And I ended up being a finalist, but didn't get selected. The chief editor there said they had to cut back on the number of their publications, and they're focusing more on children's books. And I get that, those things happen. And I said, well, would you have any other recommendations for me for a small press in Wisconsin? So she gave me the recommendation of a small press, and I sent a query to them, received a quick reply back that said, thanks for your submission. No, we are not interested in this book, and we can't see that anybody would be interested in reading this. So I said, okay, well, that's fair enough. So it sat on the shelf and sat on the shelf, and I did a little research onto self-publishing, but I got too many other things on my pile of things to do. So last year, my wife bought a book, and it was from another Wisconsin author, and she placed it on my desk. And I started reading this book, and I thought, I can do that. I can do better than that. I need to get my book done. And so within a month, I finally had my book done, and had to go the self-publishing route. So I did do self-publishing because I wanted to get that book out there. So I did release the book in January, and I do have copies of it here today. And I do want to leave a copy here at the library as well, too, so folks can check that out. If you need more than one, let me know. So I want to start today with a story that's actually not in the book, but would be in perhaps a sequel, because it kind of talks about storytelling. And I think this kind of sets the tone well for where my stories come up with. It's called Finding and Telling Stories is Not a Science. A regular reader and friend recently asked where I come up with story ideas, and do I ever get writer's block? The answers are, I'm not sure, and all the time. I would not presume to speak for others whose skill with words and stories put my prose on par with Dick and Jane. But for me, the world is surrounded by stories. They live and breathe with every person, every place, and in everything. Sometimes I see them with immediate clarity, and the words flow from my fingertips like molten lava, burning their way across the screen. It's almost effortless. More often, stories are like trying to catch patches of the early morning fog that shroud the corners of my mind like pockets of mist in the valley. I catch glimpses of them here and there, and they disappear unless I catch them at the right time. Sometimes I try my hand at humor because we all need to laugh now and then. I'm often reminded of a quote from the movie Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, when Captain Kirk quips with Vulcan officer Lieutenant Saavik and says, "It's a little joke." Humor, it's a difficult concept, Saavik says. It's not logical. We learn by doing, Kirk replies. Humor is also difficult to script because writing about what's amusing me, like having to deal with a tick embedded in a sensitive part of my anatomy, may not be logical or funny to others. I learned as a very young aspiring journalist 40 years ago that it's much harder to offend yourself, and your main risk is falling flat when you try to be funny instead of insulting others. Kirk is right, though. We learn by doing. While there are certain roadmaps to follow while telling a story, you don't get to the end without the journey. That's the personal path that each writer takes. It could be a direct route with speed and efficiency, or winding your way that comes with more detail and color. The real answer to the source of my stories comes from who I am, a flawed person doing my best to get up every day and play the hand I'm dealt. It doesn't help that I'm not a really good poker player, but I try hard to not overgrow my britches, to be genuine to myself, and more importantly, to others. A good story connects the past to the future, which is why I like to delve into history. My personal history often takes me back to events of childhood and connections with friends and family that helped mold and shape the one-of-a-kind model that sits before you today. My reflections often take me to my late grandmother, Cecil Hardie, who was the champion of what she called visiting. That's when the TV was turned off, the coffee pot was turned on, and you sat around the kitchen table and talked. Special occasions sometimes involved sitting on the Davenport in the parlor, but there was always coffee, Grandma's lubricant for socialization. She boiled it on the stove so it was hot and strong. After Grandma's passing in 1979, the social epicenter in the family became the kitchen in Aunt Sarah Claire's house, which is where I now live. Aunt Sarah also made strong coffee, and her circular kitchen table, a beautiful piece of oak with carved lion heads on the feet of the table, was ground zero for visiting. There was also super sweetened pitcher of Tang in the refrigerator for the younger folks. Coffee was also the time of day when you gathered for some sweet treats between dinner, which was a large lunch, and supper right before the evening chores. Going hungry was not an option. Whether it was at Grandma's or Aunt Sarah's, I loved hearing stories. It would be no surprise that I was drawn into a career of hearing them and telling them. So what about that challenge with writer's block? You stop thinking and let the words flow. So that's really, writing for me is therapeutic. It's part of, for me, a little quiet time with the keyboard is good time for me, because words become my friends, and telling stories and getting them out onto paper is really part of what I enjoy. So what I want to do today is to read to you a few selections from the book to kind of give you a flair and a feeling for the kind of writing that I do. So the first one that I'm going to share with you is from Winter. It's chapter 2, and it's called The Barn Coat. Most farmhouses feature a spot where boots, coats, and sometimes clothes have a special place of honor. It could be a mudroom, a back hallway, a porch, or even a separate room where the barn clothes are stored. As the name suggests, this is the clothing worn while working in the barn or with the animals. As such, it acquires a certain earthy and aromatic quality that is inevitable when one is walking amongst the manure. Keeping the smelly clothing contained is important. As my mother used to say, just because we work in a barn doesn't mean that our house has to smell like one. Our house has a back hallway for our barn clothes. There's also a rack for the coats and jackets designated for chores. One of the winter jackets that I wear is the epitome of a barn coat. It was once my main winter coat in the middle 1980s, a stylish blue quilted parka with a zipper and button snaps and a matching hood. Most of the pockets are missing and the zipper recently stopped working, but I can still snap the buttons shut. And if this were a coat from the 1970s without snaps, my mother would have either fixed the zipper, or she would have used a few safety pins to pull it shut. Most of my barn clothes are actually hand-me-downs from my office day job. Rarely do I purchase a brand new piece of clothing to wear for chores. Wearing old dress pants and dress shirts creates the illusion of being a gentleman farmer. I should throw in a few tattered ties and a suit jacket or two, and the getup would be complete. The other day, the zipper on my coat was stuck, and my efforts to pull it resulted in a broken tab. I looked down at the stub, and a big smile crept across my face with a memory of 39 years ago. It was the winter of 1980, so you can tell this story's already a few years old. In January that year was the legendary family story. I was carrying firewood when I dropped a large chunk of firewood on my dad's nose while he was watching the Super Bowl from the comfortable position of his beanbag chair. About a week later, Dad and I were feeding heifers, throwing bales of hay into a wooden feed rack. One of the boards was loose and Dad was bending over to fix it. I was a little careless with my aim and I accidentally tossed a bale of hay that hit him on the back of his head. Still a little sore from his near nasal amputation that would have killed a lesser man, to which I replied that if his nose wasn't so big, it would have been a clean miss. Dad looked up and said, "Oh, are you trying to finish the job?" About a week later, we were heading out for chores, and the zipper on my barn coat became stuck about halfway up my chest. "I can fix that," Dad said, reaching for his pliers, squeezing the tab, and giving it a mighty yank. Did you know that when Dad was 42 years old, he had incredible grip strength? And it just so happens that a person's strongest grip strength is when their hand and arm extends at 90 degrees before their body, like gripping a zipper, for example. And did you know the information sent from your retina to your occipital lobe can provoke responses of light after a strong blow to the head? It can also occur after a forceful stimulus to the bottom of your jaw from a massive hand gripping a pair of pliers with a destroyed zipper tab that didn't even have a chance. I've never been in the boxing ring, but I know what a massive uppercut feels like. I staggered a little bit, but after a standing 8 count, I shook off my profusely apologetic father and said, "I'm good to go." "I think we're even," I gasped. Even with that flashback fresh in my mind, I found myself reaching for my pliers to fix my stuck zipper, proof of my genetically slow learning capability. But I did learn one lesson as I tugged on the zipper. Sometimes you make progress by going down instead of up. Any slippage would not end up with a repeat jaw punch. I finally got the zipper down and made a mental note for future reference to use the snaps only, but I'll keep the pliers handy just in case. So one of the beauties of growing up on a farm is that you do become attached to the land. There is a rhythm of life to the seasons, and there are rituals on the farm that just become part of your very being. So I wrote about this once, and this is a spring, chapter 13. It's called Lessons from an Old Tractor. Mother Earth is slowly warming, and the season of planting is here. There's a primal need for anyone connected to the soil to dig, till, and plant, whether you're a backyard gardener or a grain farmer with thousands of acres. We simply must explore the mysteries of the dirt, seed it with life, and water with lots of hope. It's a pattern man has repeated for thousands of years since we stopped relying solely on animals as our source of nutrition. We've come a long way from the days of stone implements. Today, farmers use large tractors to pull massive equipment that plows, harrows, and plants in short order. But it was only a few generations ago that farmers moved from horses to tractors. Those early tractors would scarcely be able to move, much less operate today's large implements. When I was young, my dad and my cousin would be busy in the fields with the larger tractors putting in the crops. I remember the smell of the freshly turned soil, the fresh bags of seed that seemed to hold so much promise, and the green fields of new oats emerging from the ground. But the ultimate sign that spring had arrived was the day that we fired up the Ford 640. In the early 1970s, my parents bought an adjoining farm of 120 acres from a bachelor farmer named Chester Chet Johnson. The farm was purchased lock, stock, and barrel. Among the inventory was a Ford 640 tractor my brother Kevin dubbed Chet's Chick. The 640 was made from 1954 to 1957, and it produced 30 horsepower from its four-cylinder engine. It had a 75-inch wheelbase, 4 speeds, and the highly coveted 3-point hydraulic system based on the invention by Harry Ferguson. Ferguson was instrumental in getting Henry Ford back into the tractor business in 1939 when the two men went into partnership. The hydraulic system made handling implements and field work much easier, but the relationship between Ford and Ferguson became strained. Ferguson eventually sued for patent infringement and received $9.25 million. Ferguson started his own company, and in 1953 merged his company with Massey Harris into what became Massey Ferguson. We also had Massey Harris and Massey Ferguson tractors. Well, my favorite was the 640. I spent many hours on its metal seat raking hay on a hot summer day. We used the little gray tractor to pull hay wagons and even chopper boxes. Every spring, there would be the day that we needed the 640. It was usually parked right where it was last operated the winter before. We'd check the 6-volt battery, the oil, and the radiator. I don't ever remember putting much coolant in, just water. Sometimes we'd have to evict a family of mice that decided to move under the engine cowling for the winter. The battery would be dead, but we'd either pull it or roll it down a hill, pop the clutch in third gear, and Chet's Chick would fire up for another season of work. The tractor tended to slip out of first gear when driving down steep hills, as it did once when Dad, Kevin, and I were coming down with a big load of hay. Kevin was driving and Dad and I were sitting on the hay wagon. Suddenly we were freewheeling and I started screaming as we rushed forward to what I thought was certain death. Dad climbed across the hitch and yelled at Kevin to hit the brakes, which he did, and we skidded to a stop without jackknifing. Use second gear, Dad said. Lesson learned. Another time, my cousin Brad was driving the tractor and stopped to talk to Dad. He forgot to set the parking brake and the tractor started rolling down a steep hill. Brad started running after it, but stopped when Dad yelled at him to let it go. A little axle work was cheap compared to the injuries Brad could have sustained. Dad sold the tractor after I left the farm because it really wasn't useful for the needs of a modern dairy farm. I often wish it was still here, as it would be perfectly sized for some of the lighter farm chores that I perform. The tractor sold for about $2,000 new, and 60 years later, they still sell for that and more. I learned how to drive on Chet's Chick. I learned the value of patience as I circled the same field for hours and hours, turning over furrows of hay. I learned that part of growing up was taking on responsibility and people depended on me. The tractor helped shape the experience of turning a boy into a man. So the next story that I want to share with you is something that would be very familiar to anybody that spent any time on a farm in the summer, baling hay. There are several chapters in my book devoted to baling hay. When my wife was reading the book, she said, "You write too much about baling hay." I said, "No, I don't, because if you grew up on a farm, it consumed your life in the summer." So I want to read to you my chapter 2 from summer. It's called "Nothing Easy About Making Hay." There's an old farming adage that says you need to make hay while the sun shines. While that's certainly true, there's another phrase that should be attached to that quaint axiom. It'll be a scorching. Last week, Friday, the temperature in La Crosse at 4 p.m. was 95 degrees, tying a record for that date. At that precise time, I was moving and stacking hay bales in a barn where there was little light and even less air. It wasn't just hot, it was suffocating. It is perhaps this repeated exposure to such conditions that has burned out a few of the logical brain cells that I have left. It is certainly not the outcome one expects from anyone acting with a sense of reason. Folks, if reason ruled the roost, we'd have very few farmers perched on our landscape. Instead, we reach deep into our primal selves and quoting the face of someone epitomizing little reason, we simply get her done. Faithful readers may recall my tone last year about the continued equipment breakdowns and challenges while baling hay, because one can add a third phrase to you need to make hay while the sun shines, it'll be a scorcher, and excrement will happen. One of the first tasks this year was to change a blowout on one of our hay wagons. I thought elves might change the tire, but lo and behold, the wagon was parked right where I left it last summer. My solution was swapping out the entire wheel from another hay wagon that has seen better days, selecting the best of 4 tires that were rejected for road use a decade ago. The tire was 15 inches rather than 16, but the rims lined up, and the days of having nice level hay wagons on the farm have not been seen since Jimmy Carter was in office. I went to fetch the tractor, but I was met with silence when I turned the key. Diagnosis, after I hooked up the battery charger and fried one of the cables when I put it on maximum boost, was a bad starter. Dad and I fetched another tractor. This one was without brakes, and pulled the tractor out of the shed. I rolled it down the hill, popped the clutch, and we had ourselves a semi-working piece of farm equipment. We immediately established a rule. Operator rule number 1, don't turn off the engine unless you're parked on the hill. A few hours later, we had to implement operator rule number 2 when oil started to leak from the bottom of the engine. Check oil often and add as necessary. Repeat frequently. The fourth phrase to the growing adage about making hay is, you need to make hay while the sun shines, it'll be a scorcher, excrement will happen, and it will rain. Yes, I know that rain cancels the first part about sun shining, but finding a few days in a row is as challenging as catching greased pigs while wearing rubber gloves. We managed to get 3 loads done on Wednesday and unloaded 2 of them in the rain on Thursday morning. Friday, we tipped the hay over. Dad started baling. I knew more rain was coming, so I unloaded and stacked hay with the 3 best helpers I know, me, myself, and I. I put 40 bales on the elevator and watched them disappear into the barn, where myself then carried and stacked them before I came back to the hay wagon for another round. Myself and I wondered where the heck me was. We suspected he was slacking off somewhere in the shade. I noticed the chain on the elevator was very loose. Myself said to ignore it, but I decided to listen to me, who showed up with a wrench and suggested that all 3 of us would have even more excrement to deal with if the chain broke. So we tightened the chain. Dad finished baling the hay that was dry, and the 4 of us then finished unloading. Although me didn't help as much as myself and I. We think me was wimping out. The sky was ominously dark in the north as we finished putting up the last of about 1,000 bales into the barn. The heavens broke loose a little while later with a heavy rainfall. The remaining hay will need to be turned again as we follow the proper adage cycle for dry forage harvest. I suspect we'll put up a few round bales for the beef cows. But in a few weeks, we'll be at it again as we do battle with second crop after some repair work or an investment in a tanker of oil. Meanwhile, myself and I need to make sure that me gets with the program. So the next story I want to share with you is not really about farming, but it's about growing up. And it's a story also about baseball. This is a story that I actually shared at my father's funeral 5 years ago. Summer chapter 23, the shot heard round the farm. Midsummer, circa 1973. My brother Kevin and I were playing baseball. Our makeshift diamond had the chicken coop as the backstop, sand and gravel as our infield, a very spacious center field, no pulling allowed. A hit to left field would have gone directly into Aunt Sarah's house. We never really ran bases as our 2-man team consisted mainly of someone pitching and someone hitting. If we had our cousins or friends available to play, the game would move about a mile away to the ball field at the old one-room schoolhouse. Our limited supply of baseballs made us search long and hard for foul balls that disappeared into the weeds. Mom had recently found a great deal on baseballs that were 3 for $1 or something like that. Unfortunately, The balls turned into mush after a couple of whacks and were pretty much unusable. So we decided to borrow the baseball. Dad's never been much of a collector, but he did have one treasured possession. Sitting on top of his dresser was a baseball that he caught at a 1957 Milwaukee Braves game. 57 was a magical year for Milwaukee baseball. Hank Aaron won the Most Valuable Player award with 44 home runs, 132 RBIs, and a 322 batting average. Warren Spahn won the Cy Young with a 21-11 record, 18 complete games, a 2.69 earned run average, and 3 saves. Milwaukee won the National League pennant with a 95-59 record and defeated the New York Yankees in the World Series with Lou Burdett winning 3 games. The baseball was a special sports memento from a special year. Our intent was to return the baseball after we were done playing. Since it wasn't autographed or anything, it would be no harm, no foul. Kevin's Louisville slugger rested on his shoulder as I leaned in from the mound, a board on a slight raise of sand. The baseball felt good in my hand. The special ball called for a special pitch. Here comes my knuckle curve, Kev, I proclaimed and let it fly. MLB.com says the knuckle curve is one of baseball's greatest paradoxes, given that a curveball is defined by its spin and a knuckleball is defined by its lack thereof. It produces the desired effect of 2 pitches, a slow curveball break mixed with the unpredictable fluttering of the knuckleball. Quote, very few pitchers have mastered the knuckle curve, and those that throw it generally don't do it often, the website said. It's a deceptive weapon for those pitchers, often stashed away until they think a hitter will be fooled by it. I had certainly not mastered the pitch, and announcing it in advance was not very deceptive. It really didn't spin or flutter and just sort of hung in the air. With a flick of the bat, Kevin sent the horsehide-wrapped cushion cork ball with its 108 double stitches soaring into the summer sky. We watched in awe as the ball rose higher and higher into center field and went up and over the old livestock shed called the upper barn. We stood for a moment, stunned. A good shot was when you hit the side of the barn. Sometimes you even reached the roof. Never was a ball hit over the barn until now. Baseball history had just been made. Holy crap, Kev, I said. I think you got all that one. I think so, he said. Our relation was immediately tempered. That was Dad's ball. We ran into the no man's land behind the upper barn to begin our search. It was a massive thicket of head-high weeds intertwined with old farm equipment. We searched for about an hour before giving up. A harder task was before us. How were we going to break the news to Dad that his precious sports souvenir was gone? We were equally to blame. I threw the ball. Kevin hit the ball. We were willing participants in the commission of crime. I can't remember if it was Kevin's idea or mine, but we decided to deflect some of the fault to another party who had no knowledge of the crime, but in our minds was really the person to blame. So after chores that evening, while we were eating dinner, we told Dad what happened. You did what? His booming voice raised rhetorically. But it was Mom's fault, Kevin said. If she wouldn't have bought those cheap baseballs, we wouldn't have had to use yours. It wasn't fair to gang up on Mom, but it was the diversion that we needed. Dad went from near eruption status to steaming, and we promised to look for the ball again the next day. We never found the baseball. Dad forgave us. The next week, Mom stopped at the local Coast to Coast and bought us some real baseballs. We played baseball a lot that summer and even joined a local Little League team. We had lots of fun, but never won a game. I never did master the knuckle curve, but I'll always remember our version of the shot heard round the world. I also do have a story in this book about that Little League team, a bunch of farm kids, and we carved a baseball field out of the middle of a cornfield, and we never did win a game. So there's also a story in the book about that. How are we doing on time? Okay. I think they said 45 minutes. Okay. All right. Well, That's all right. I've got another story or two to tell here. We'll keep going until people start kicking me out or whatever happens. I do want to leave time for questions, however, though, too. So there's another story about autumn that I would like to share. This is a good example of a lot of my story ideas kind of come from driving around the country and seeing something, observing something, and it kind of resonates, it sticks in my brain, and it's like, I need to write about that. So this is a story that I wrote after observing something just on my daily drive. It's Fall Chapter 4, and it's called The Alluring Nature of Autumn. I stopped the other day on a country road for a moment or two, a brief respite towards the end of another busy day. I drive by my point of rest every day. It's a barn no longer in use next to an abandoned farmhouse. The barn's not that old. The rounded roof appears to be in good shape and still has all its faded red paint. Next to it is a small silo. There are many of these scenes dotting the countryside. Buildings on smaller family farms no longer needed, where the economics of farming has ended their usefulness. They stand silent and empty, eventually succumbing to the forces of nature. But on this late afternoon, I was beckoned to stop. The hillside behind the barn was a canvas of reds, orange, yellow, brown, and green, illuminated by the sun and framed by a bright blue sky. The setting sun was already casting a shadow on the floor of the valley, and in a few minutes, the scene would be lost. I pulled off the road to capture this moment of pure autumn in Wisconsin. The timing may change slightly each year depending on the weather, but the palette of Mother Nature comes just the same. Daylight hours diminish, and the photosynthesis in trees slows and stops. Deciduous leaves dominated by green chlorophyll the rest of the year show the yellows, orange, and brown from carotenoid pigments and the reds from anthocyanins. The Wisconsin Department of Tourism tracks the changing colors across the state in its weekly color report. Leaf peepers travel across the state to take in an art show unrivaled by any museum. The show builds, climaxes, and fades in a drab final scene as the browns of late fall turn into winter. It's also harvest time, and farmers hope for an Indian summer marked by the sunny, dry, and warm temperatures after the killing frost. It extends the small window to bring in the crops. On our farm, the corn has already been harvested, soybean harvest is underway, and I have hopes of a late hay cutting. The beauty of fall is tinged with some sadness. The shortened days and cooler temperatures are our annual reminder that we're growing older. Work undone, words unsaid, regrets remembered. The English poet John Keats captured the melancholy of fall in his poem To Autumn, published in 1820. Here's the last stanza. Where are the songs of spring? Aye, where are they? Think not of them, thou hast thy music too. While barred clouds bloom the soft dying day and touch the stubble plains with rosy hue, then in a wailful choir the small gnats mourn among the river sallows, borne aloft or sinking as the light wind lives or dies. And full-grown lambs loud bleat from hilly bourne. Hedge crickets sing, and now with treble soft, the redbreast whistles from a garden croft, and gathering swallows twitter in the skies. It was one of Keats' last works, inspired by a walk he took near Winchester on a September day in 1819. He died less than a year after the poem was published. Life is sometimes as tenuous as the withering stem that holds the leaf to the branch. We know not if we're in the autumn of our lives or whether spring will come. She teases us, autumn does, with her fleeting beauty. Take my hand, she whispers through the rustling leaves. So we do, and we dance amidst the blazing landscape, leaving our cares and worries behind if only for a while. Inhale autumn's beauty. Be still. Thank your maker and enjoy the dance. All of this came from just driving down the road, and I did take a picture of that barn with all the colored landscape. So here's a story that really has no season, but I plugged it into fall because I thought it fit there. Sometimes I write about everyday events that occur in life and put them into context, because I know that everyone else out there faces the same kind of things, and sometimes life gets a little hard. So I think we have to have a little fun. It's called The Scourge of Planned Obsolescence. Fall, chapter 11. They just don't make them like they used to. I have uttered or heard that phrase many times, usually sprinkled in with a few colorful adjectives, especially at the precise moment when a wrench slips off the head of a rusty bolt and my knuckles scrape across sharp steel. I learned at a young age from my father that sometimes the wrench is at fault when it strips or bends. To paraphrase his words, it is clearly a lower priced and lower quality product due to its source of manufacturer in an Asian country. Yes, you get what you pay for, which still doesn't prevent me from passing up a great deal at times. It's hard not to stock up when the price is right. I also expect my purchases to last at least a reasonable amount of time. Okay, maybe I push that expectation a bit. My car has 218,000 miles, and I do have that shirt that I started wearing in 8th grade, which I actually still do have that shirt. I wrote a column about that once too. Recently, I had to move some heavy objects, so I grabbed my utility cart to take advantage of wheels and leverage. The tires were low on pressure, and one leaked as badly as a Trump administration aide. It wouldn't even hold air. Now, if this cart were as old as my shirt, I'd roll with it, but I just bought the cart last year. And the only reason I bought it was because I went to buy new tires for my old cart, and I found out that it's cheaper to buy a new cart than it is to buy replacement tires. Yes, they don't make them like they used to, and it's intentional. It's called planned obsolescence. Here's how Investopedia defines it. Planned obsolescence is a purposefully implemented strategy that ensures the current version of a given product will become out of date or useless within a known time period. This guarantees that consumers will demand replacements in the future, thus naturally supporting demand. Obsolescence can be achieved through introduction of a superior replacement or a product design meant to cease proper function within a specific window, or by cultivating desirability of new versions over older ones. That's good old-fashioned supply and demand. If you make something too well, it'll last too long and there will be not enough demand. And that may not be good for the bottom line. My folks have an old refrigerator in their basement that was made in the early 1950s, and it still works fine. Energy efficient, it is not, but it keeps humming along. Today, we're lucky to get 10 years out of a refrigerator. I know there are skeptics about planned obsolescence. Here's more proof. When light bulbs first came out on the market in the late 1800s, those early incandescent bulbs had thicker carbon filaments. One of those bulbs, called the Centennial light, is still in use after 116 years in the fire department building of Livermore, California, and has lasted more than 1 million hours. As the use of electrical lights expanded, light bulb companies realized that they could make lots more money if they didn't make those bulbs that lasted so long. So representatives from some of the top light bulb manufacturers in the world colluded, I'm sure the Russians were also involved, to make cheaper products so the bulbs would last only 1,000 hours. There's also a reason why Henry Ford stopped making the same Model T. General Motors decided that introducing new car models every year was a way to get new customers. Perhaps the biggest purveyor of planned obsolescence today is the smartphone industry. Parts aren't made to last, repairs difficult, if not impossible, new models come out all the time. The ubiquitous device is the poster child for our throwaway society. Which brings me back round to my utility cart, which the last time I checked wasn't made by Apple, but who knows? I am now faced with the decision of buying another new cart, which will be cheaper than trying to buy new tires. But the tubeless tires are so cheap that I'll be faced with the same dilemma in another year. I swear we still have my daughter's Barbie doll cart in the attic from 30 years ago with better tires. So unless I want to build a fence out of old utility carts that don't roll anymore, I'll probably buy some tubes and upgrade my tires. If only I could find a box of those old light bulbs. So I want to share a story. Deer hunting has always been. I have several stories in this book about deer hunting because it's always been a family tradition. It's always been a bonding time for uh, my grandpa and me, my dad and me, now my son and me, and now last year I hunted with my grandson. So it's been a generational thing. Um, this is a story that I wrote called the Fall Chapter 20. It's called The Last Hunting Season. I'll see if I can get through this without misting up. It's sometimes hard for me. Dad sipped coffee from his dented thermos as we watched a large gray squirrel scamper up a nearby tree. We were sitting in a deer stand overlooking two fields. It was late November 23, November 23rd, 2019, the opening day of Wisconsin gun deer hunting season. It was the 70th season Dad was participating in an annual hunt. We knew it was going to be his last. Dad's mobility and mental alertness had been declining for several years. The previous year, he sat with me in my hunting stand for a few hours and had difficulty climbing the hill. We were concerned about his safety. Dad was an expert hunter. He knew the farm like the back of his hand. He never built a deer stand, but always sat in the same valley where deer frequently crossed. As the landscape changed, he would move his spot, but he always got a deer, and it was usually the biggest buck taken that year from the farm. Like 1983, when he shot an 8-point buck with a 21-inch spread that field dressed 200 pounds. Over the past 4 or 5 years, Dad hasn't gotten a deer. He never even took a shot, but it was still important for him to be in the woods, especially on opening day. When Dad announced that he was going to hunt, my son Ross and I built a deer stand that was easily accessible from a field road. It wasn't an ideal location, but over the years has been a spot where deer have been taken. We didn't want him hunting alone, so we agreed to take turns. Ross started the morning by driving Dad to the stand and sitting with him for the first few hours. I came over in the late morning. "What kind of tree is that?" Dad said, pointing to a nearby gnarly bur oak. Dad once did a 4-H project where he created a display of all the different trees that were found on the farm. He knew trees, but not today. "I think that's a bur oak," I replied. "Oh, sure," he nodded in agreement. The fields we overlooked were cleared by my great-grandfather. Dad had told me the story many times, but I wanted to hear it again. "Weren't these fields cleared by Grandpa Ray?" I asked. "Yes, they were," he said. "They used a stump puller and dragged the stumps out with a stone boat. Can you imagine how hard that had to be?" Old memories came out easily most days. We talked about his first hunting experience on the public land on the eastern side of Jackson County because deer were scarce on our farm. We talked about his father and how we always hunted over an open fire, a tradition I carry on today. For a few moments, it was like the old days, the father and son sitting together in the cold November woods, sharing a bond that transcends simply pulling the trigger of a gun. Like the second day of the season in 1978, when Dad insisted that I hunt from his stand and I shot my first buck. I was just finishing the field dressing when Dad walked down the hill. "You got one," he said in his matter-of-fact style. "No, it's not that big," I replied, mentally comparing the single antlers to the 8-pointer he had shot the previous morning. "No, it's a nice one," he said with a smile. A load was lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer the buck fever kid who couldn't shoot. As I stood there with my father less than a month removed from my 15th birthday, I felt like a man. It wasn't the thrill of the kill, but the sense that I belonged. Like the first year Ross shot a deer and excitedly came to Dad to share the news. "Grandpa," he said, "I think I shot a deer." "Well, we better take a look," Dad replied. Like the morning of the blizzard of 1991, when 13 inches of snow fell on opening day, I shot a doe about 10 a.m. and had started a fire to stay warm. Dad came down the hill behind my deer stand, dragging a log to throw on the fire. Like the year Dad couldn't find his license but went hunting anyway before his duplicate was in hand. Quote, no jury in Jackson County is going to convict a man hunting on his own land, he harumphed as he headed out the door. Like the year when he discovered on opening morning that Mom had packed his wool hunting clothes in mothballs. Not a scent that blends in with the woods. So many memories, so many stories. Dad fell silent. What kind of tree is that? He said, pointing to the same tree we had discussed 20 minutes ago. I think it's a bur oak, Dad, turning my face away to wipe away the moistening tears. Oh, sure, he said. A little while later, Dad said he wanted to watch the Badgers football game. I gave him a ride in the truck, and he settled into his easy chair. Dad's last hunting season was over. Dad always said when it was time to go, he wanted to be in the woods under his favorite tree. He didn't exactly get his wish, but he did die at home. My 45th hunting season this year will be sad. Because my hunting partner and mentor is gone, the woods will seem empty, but Dad will be there, nevertheless, because his memories and stories remain. Sorry. You'd think after 6 years, I could tell that story, but still hits home. All right, well, let's end with something a little more uplifting. So this is called Fall Chapter 22. It's called Full Moon Faux Pas. I learned a long time ago as a column writer who sometimes ventures into the risky territory of humor that the safest butt of jokes is yourself. My slow learning curve was accelerated by upset readers and hindsight. What's funny to some is not funny to all. It's easy, whether intentional or not, to offend. I'm much more rounded now, but getting everyone to crack a smile is still a challenge. And while I still fly from the seat of my pants at times, offending oneself is safe territory. So, with tongue firmly planted in the cheek, I present a tale, I mean a T-A-L-E, of the almost supermoon sighting that happened on the farm last week. The premise is true, and the names have not been changed to protect the guilty. Some might call it lunacy. I think it was lunarcy. For those who missed it last weekend, November's full moon was an almost supermoon because the fullness was very close to the perigee, the point where the moon is closest to the earth. Back closer to home, a few hours after the supermoon in the sky, there was another near supermoon on the Hardie farm. That morning, my wife Sherry and I decided it was time to bring our ram back in with the ewes for breeding. We had separated Fergus and the young rams, which sounds like the name of a rock band, from the flock a couple of months ago. It was time to bring the stud into the flock so that we'll have spring lambs. Fergus, a fully grown Scottish blackface ram with big curly horns, is generally pretty friendly and likes to be scratched under his chin. My plan was to scratch him, grab his horns, and head off to the ewe barn. But for some reason, Fergus was extremely wary and wouldn't come anywhere close to me. Even with the lure of a pail of feed, Fergus was playing hard to get. I had to go to plan B, wait until Fergus got close and tackle him. Hardly a sophisticated strategy, but one that has nevertheless proven effective in the past. I poured out a little feed. I waited. Fergus came closer. I leaped. I should have waited for Fergus to get even closer. Instead of grabbing his horns, all I had was a couple of tufts of his fleece. Fergus did not take kindly to my attempt and with all his might tried to pull away. I knew I had to hold on and bring him to the ground. I did hold on. My pants did not. My dungaree selection that day was an old pair of black sweatpants. The string to cinch the waistband is long gone, and the elastic is stretched and old, a perfect complement to the belly it surrounds. The old elastic gave way as Fergus dragged me. In a span of 10 feet and 1.4 seconds, the pants went from my waist to my knees. The only thing between my birthday suit and the cold November sky was my drawers, and I could feel those starting to slide. Couple more seconds of dragging, and there would have been a big white supermoon, as fullness would have lined up with perigee. That would have been both embarrassing and potentially painful. I didn't have time to worry about my lower regions because I had to gain the upper hand. Luckily, I did, bringing Fergus to the ground. In one less than graceful fell swoop, I grabbed his horns with one hand and pulled up my pants with the other. Sherry greeted my foibles with laughter, suggesting that the experience would make for a good column. Oh, hell, she knows me. I dragged Fergus out of the pen, and the recalcitrant ram suddenly was eager to head for the greener pastures of the ewe barn. He arrived without further incident. If he didn't catch a glimpse of November's near supermoon, there'll be another supermoon next month. I plan to be safely tucked away in bed, holding up the waistband of my pajamas. So that's kind of an example of some of the storytelling that's in this book. Humor, a little bit of sadness, a little bit of reminiscing. I can just say that if I can say one thing about the book is it's very genuine. Everything in this book is me. It's who I am. It's the reflection and appreciation of my ancestors, reflection and appreciation of growing up on the farm, and just the gift of storytelling that I received from probably my grandmother and something that I enjoy doing. So, are there any questions that I can help answer?
How old were you when you went back?
2006 is when we went back to the farm. So I left in 82, and then 2006 we moved back to the farm. My wife and I moved into my great-grandparents' house, and we added on and opened up a bed and breakfast. And then we ran then in 2013 we opened up a winery. And then we moved the winery to West Salem in 2023, and then we closed the bed and breakfast. And then I sold all the animals. I no longer have animals. I can't take care of too many things. At one time, I had 24 Scottish Highland cows, 50 Scottish blackface sheep, couple dozen chickens, and would raise pigs every summer to fatten. And that was all while I was still working full time at the paper and still run the B&B. So I finally decided that I had to pull back a little bit on some of these things. One story that's not in the book is the one year I thought I could actually make some money farming. That was the drought year. I think it's 2013. Price of small squares were going up to like $8 or $10 a piece, and I had a good first and second crop that year, and then nothing after that because the rain just stopped. But I had, I think, about probably 3,000-4,000 bales of good small squares in the barn. So I told Sherry, I said, I got an idea. I said, let's sell all the sheep, and then we'll make some money off of that, and I'll sell all the hay, and then I can buy more sheep next year because we'll be making lots of money off selling the hay. Well, yeah, no, it didn't go anywhere. You can't sell my pets. So there was no farming to be made. Then there was the 1 year that we sheared our sheep, and I sent in I think it was 112 pounds of wool, and got a check for 0.00 cents, a genuine check. There was no value in the wool that year, so I should have saved that check and framed it, because that would be a good example of my success in trying to farm. All right. Well, I have copies of my book with me. They're 1995 plus tax, but I'll just round it to $20. So if anybody wants books today, I'll be happy. And again, I would like to donate one to the library so that people can check it out. So if there are no other questions, I want to thank you for coming today.
Recording. I remembered that part better. Okay.